In this interview, I speak with Micah Louwagie. Micah was raised on a family dairy farm in southwestern Minnesota alongside four siblings. They graduated from Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota in 2016 with a bachelor's degree in religion, and in 2021 with a Masters of Divinity from Wartburg Theological Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa. Micah and their wife Wesley currently reside in Austin, Texas with their two cats. Micah's hobbies include baking sourdough bread, cycling, and marveling at how cute their cats are. Not as cute as my cat. Enjoy. Why, hello, Micah.
Well, hello, Ash.
So, everyone's story of faith is unique, and everyone's kind of queer story is unique. And then when you smush those together, that creates this kaleidoscope of even more unique. So I don't know where to start. Like, if you want to, if you want to start with your kind of the faith side of things or the queer side of things, at some point though, we'll talk about how they smash into each other.
So a little bit of my background. I guess I'll start with the faith thing because that's what surfaced first for me.
Great.
I was raised in the church. I was raised in an evangelical Lutheran church in America, congregation, kind of like way out on the prairie in southwestern Minnesota. My mom got involved with some of the leadership there. I had what at first was a fairly positive experience. A lot of the elders in that congregation kind of almost adopted myself and my three younger siblings as kind of pseudo grandchildren. Mm-hmm. I had a pastor when I was little who was actually the first female pastor I had ever encountered. And she is now kind of like an adoptive grandparent. And she has actually been there for me when I had to like cease contact with some biological grandparents. So that's been a really cool relationship. And I can touch more on that later. So, fast forward a few years, I stay involved in the church. I go to a Lutheran college. I went to Gustavus. I was one of those kids. I did young adults and global mission, did the good little Lutheran thing. And then I was like, yeah, now I'm going to seminary. And I get back from a year abroad and I come out of the closet and I start seminary. And somewhere in there, I cut my then very, very long hair short. And then all of these gender feelings start surfacing, right? And I'm like, oh boy, howdy, what do we do with this? And it was terrifying because I was raised in a very rural setting. I grew up on a dairy farm outside of a very small town in Minnesota. So I had never heard anything positive about queer people from like my family growing up. So my immediate reaction was just like, I was just scared shitless, quite frankly. So I stuck with it. I prayed about it. I found my people who, I knew would love and accept me, started coming out. And all of a sudden, it's like this whole other universe of possibilities had just like opened up in front of me. And it's been like the holiest and scariest thing ever.
I'm curious, so I've only ever known you with the short hair. So can you tell me, I have my own versions of this, but okay, so what was your motivation for cutting your hair short at the time?
At the time, I had just gotten back from my service year was in Madagascar.
Which is nothing like the cartoon.
Nothing like the cartoon.
You think? I've never been there, but I've heard there are no talking animals.
No talking animals. And working alongside the Lutheran Church over there, which is very, very conservative. I was very deeply closeted there. I was at the time more feminine, but I was really forced into like keep my hair long, wear skirts, all that jazz. And I got home, and I don't know if it was gender feelings. There was an unrest. I had such a deep unrest. And I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna cut my hair. Like that's what we'll start with. Something's gotta go here, and I think it's the hair.
And it was like opening up
Yeah.
the door to more gender feels.
Yeah.
So like, was it like kind of, oh shit, I think I know something? How did that hit you?
It was, oh God, it was terrifying. It was like the biggest oh shit moment I think I've ever had. I sat in my bedroom at my mom and stepdad's house, and honestly, I think I cried for hours out of sheer anxiety, because I was like, shit, how am I going to come out to my parents? Like, am I going to get disowned? You know, and I knew right off the bat that my mother's parents would not be receptive. And I don't think I would have ceased contact with them completely for another year or so after that. But it was the beginning of the beginning for some things and the beginning of the end for other things. And it was an odd experience.
As you're having like this oh shit moment, like, and I know that you said like, I grew up in rural Minnesota, also a different part of rural Minnesota, but this idea that, queerness of whatever variety was not a positive thing at all. Some were worse than others, but none of it was like, yay. But what about your Christianity, your spirituality? Like, as you're starting to realize like, oh shit, like, how did your Christianity come into it? Did you feel like you were violating it? Did it feel?
I never ever felt like I was violating my faith, ever. In fact, I felt like I was actually living more fully into my faith by living into myself. And part of listening to God is also listening to myself, because so my faith is it's Trinitarian. So, if I actually believe that Christ remains incarnate within and through and all around us through the Holy Spirit, I'm like, well, that includes me too. So part of honoring my faith is also like honoring this identity that God has gifted me with. And so actually through the whole coming out process, I lost some relationships. I lost some family members, lost some friends. And the people who stuck with me are the people who really, they held the promises of my faith when I couldn't hold them for myself, because I was working through so much shame and anxiety. And they are the people who really like showed Jesus to me in those moments, and continue to do so, honestly.
It's interesting. I was talking to someone earlier about how part of the narrative of maybe conventional or somewhat conservative forms of Christianity, that when someone comes out as queer or chooses the gay lifestyle, however they want to frame it, that is ultimately driven by a desire to kind of debauch and to be selfish. And, listening to your story so far reminds me of like, I don't know anyone, very few people would just deliberately choose to like lose swaths of family and friends.
Yeah.
And that's part of the tension is like, there's often been this internalization of the story. Like, well, no, the proper Christian thing to do is always to self-diminish so that the people around you can feel more comfortable. And I feel like there's something about white Minnesotan culture that even amplifies that further.
Oh, yes.
Was that part of like the struggle? Like, because you're talking about like spending a long time brokenhearted about like, oh shit.
Yeah.
What were the things you were afraid of? What was the weight of that? Where was it?
Yeah, what was I afraid of? It's one of those things where I look back and I go, Micah, what were you afraid of? Many things. I was afraid of one of my parents in particular disowning me. So far, that parent has been far more supportive than I anticipated, which has been a gift. I grew up with all these ideas of, dedication to biological family, as is fairly common in outstate Minnesota. And so much emphasis is placed on the family of origin as like, that's your family. Like you must maintain relationships at all costs.
Family first.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I grew up hearing that so many times. And through a lot of therapy, I came to realize like how so very harmful that was to me growing up. And I also came to realize that like I can choose family too. Like I now have like chosen siblings and a chosen grandmother. And there's like so much beauty and fulfillment in that. I was also a member at a church in the small town that I grew up in that has a not insignificant percentage of members who are very conservative and very, very homophobic and queerphobic. So I was really scared of losing that community, and I did end up losing that community. I ended up leaving. I just kind of quietly emailed a friend who worked there and said, hey, I need to leave. And she was like, yep, nope, got it. So I did lose a lot, and there's still a lot of grief there. But also, I am honestly the happiest I have ever been. I am the closest to God that I have ever been. If I had never come out, I would have never, married my wife. Or honestly, I don't know that I could have been this happy had I not come out.
How did, you've alluded to this a couple of times, but how did coming out or moving deeper into that part of yourself that was kind of submerged, how did that change the way you relate to God?
I have experienced God as so much more expansive since coming out. And I've learned how to just kind of live in paradox and live in these liminal spaces. And I relate to God as someone who just kind of chills with me in these liminal spaces. I have so many moments where I'm like, well, this is an odd experience. I don't fully understand what's going on. And God is like, it's all right. You're doing good, bud. Or just kind of, dwells with me. Like I've learned how to dwell with God in the midst of so many questions and transitions. And like this God is just like so beautiful and mysterious and expansive. And yet like so close. It's the coolest thing.
Yeah, I'm just sitting there thinking about how, this idea, which somehow kind of, particularly like the way in which a certain strand of, maybe it's a Catholic thing too, but I see it strongly in kind of the Protestant American experience of hard work, self-sacrifice, selflessness, denial. None of that is conducive to self-exploration or going deeper. But if you can kind of break free and become fully yourself, how that actually enhances how big God is. Like
Yeah.
The idea that somehow you have to make yourself smaller in order for God to be bigger is a steaming pile of horse shit. Or some other sort of livestock shit. Maybe even sheep shit. I don't know. Whatever shit is the stinkiest, it's that one.
Turkey shit, in my opinion.
Turkeys are dumb. I had a job one day where where I ran around keeping young turkeys from huddling and crushing each other to death.
Oh, God.
So I'd have to go smack them with a towel. That's an aside that has nothing to do with this interview. Just some flavoring. But the idea that, I can be bigger in a way that isn't not to the exclusion of others, because there's people can take up space in ways that are shitty.
Yeah.
But becoming bigger in a way that's expansive and then allows more room, not only for other people, but allows you to have a bigger view of God. Yeah. I think that's something that's counterintuitive to a lot of people. And I think it's something that a lot of folks, who have similar stories to you or to me, who part of their queering story is about moving more deeply into the bigness and I guess I have less assumptions about God. That means that there's more there. It's like finding out that the playground's bigger. Yeah. There's more slides than you thought were there before, or whatever. I don't know. My metaphors are a little off today. So how did this, what about your relationship? So I know the ELCA, for those who aren't, or Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, for those who aren't as familiar, at least on paper, is queer affirming to a point. There was that situation when this was decided, when there's Lutherans meeting downtown Minneapolis, and then apparently, according to John Piper, esteemed pastor, God sent a tornado to knock the cross off or some shit. But I don't know if you've heard that, or if you're familiar with that story.
Is that the story of the St. Peter tornado?
I don't know. No, there's when that decision was being made whether or not there could be gay pastors. I think, a tornado came by in the top of the cross in that church and got knocked down, and then John Piper, who's a very famous conservative Calvinistic preacher, said that was like a sign from God of displeasure. I remember hearing that, and after that there was splits within the Lutheran Church, and of course not every Lutheran Church, but so that might be true. So on paper, but how has this experience changed the way you relate to your tradition and your denomination? What's that been like?
Yeah. So my current standing is that my calling is to serve God, not an institution. I will say that first off.
That sounds good. Sounds like a great priority. Yeah.
Yeah. So the ELCA on paper can be affirming. Congregations have a fair amount of authority. Mm-hmm. And so basically they have what they call the bound conscience clause. And I'm probably not going to get this all exactly correct, but the gist of it is that they allow non-affirming congregations to remain within the ELCA. And so congregations can still choose whether or not they want to hire an openly LGBTQIA two-spirit plus person. So I mean, the ELCA basically just gave its congregations free rein to discriminate. And of course, they can do so legally here in the United States, which is very frustrating. I have found some churches to be super fantastic. The one that I just started working for has been absolutely stellar. I have found other churches to be, even the ones that are affirming on paper, just so underinformed and or misinformed, particularly about trans folks. Yeah.
I would imagine you have friends in the queer sphere, and I don't. Something about the word queer community. I'm like, the word community gets tacked on so much for things, but the queer sphere,
queer sphere. I'm into it.
I don't know if that's a thing. It's what came to mind now, but I'm gonna push that.
It's gonna be a thing now.
But I'm sure I have queer friends who they just don't want to have anything to do with any formal sort of Christian thing because of the pain and stuff. I'm wondering how you think about that. Because like I often have to explain to people like, okay, yeah, I am a Christian and I am into Jesus-y stuff. And I'm actually a professional Christian. Yet I'm an anarchist and I'm queer as fuck. So like, right. And that's dissonance for a lot of people. I mean, have you encountered that sort of like the kind of people that are kind of a little floored by?
Oh, that absolutely.
You're a pastor. Like, how can you be a pastor?
I sometimes have to start those conversations out like other queer folks would be like, hey, what do you do, Micah? And I'm like, okay, like, I promise this isn't as weird as it sounds, or maybe it is, but like, I'm school to be a pastor. And they're like, what? And I get it. Oh my God, there's so much religious trauma, particularly for queer and trans folks. Mm-hmm. And I can't fucking stand it when the church harms people. Like, I can't. It makes me so angry. And some days it makes me wonder why I even stay in it, to be quite honest. But yeah, it's, I get some weird reactions.
Why do you stick with it?
God, why do I stick with it?
I mean, I know like that's, I understand like how it's a hard question, and my answer to that question will change. There's several different answers I could give on any given day because it changes.
Yeah. I think my current reason is that my calling is currently still so strong that I really can't say no. The avenue that happens to be available to me for following this calling is through the ELCA. Mm-hmm. That avenue may change in the future. I don't know. I am open to that avenue changing. So I think that's the best answer I have right now.
What like, just to kind of add another layer to that, like to a lot of people who aren't, who particularly they're not in ministry or they're not familiar with this idea of calling in that sort of way. Like, what does that mean to you?
To me, it means that I've had a lot of conversations with God and I've done a lot of thinking and reflecting and dwelling. And what I have gotten out of all of this is that I am called to give Jesus to people. Sometimes that looks like just sitting with people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it looks like, pulpit supply, being authorized to preside over communion and those types of things. But more often than not, it's in the little things. Like, I bake sourdough bread. So occasionally when I pulpit supply, I will also supply communion bread.
Nice.
Or
like a twofer.
Like a twofer.
When I think that's interesting, like my tendency is to think, like, say also, I feel like this is, I do feel a sense of strong vocation. And there's also some healthy fuck you in there too. I'm like, okay, yeah, the church is shit, but they don't get to tell me who Jesus is. I'm going to tell them. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to stick around because some of the ideas of Jesus, but also the ideas of what a church could be is just too important, and I don't want to give up on it. But I'm not going to like rest, right, to take it easy about it either. But at the same time, like, I understand that a lot of people it's probably good for them just to walk out the door of the church and never look back.
Yeah.
And that's hard to know if someone should do that or not. Like, and I'm wondering if you have, since you're a pastor, if you had a young young congregant who was like, I'm Pastor Micah. I think I'm queer. I'm trans, and I don't know if the church is a safe place to me. I want to just walk away. Like, how? I know it's a hypothetical, and I hate hypothetical pastoral care scenarios. Like, they're not. But like, I'm just generally like, what kind of wisdom do you have for someone who's kind of feeling that stuckness, knowing how much pain churches can cause?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would definitely thank that person for sharing that information, because it is such a privilege when somebody comes out to you. It's a gift, huge gift. I would tell them to trust their gut on whether or not they are safe. I will also tell them that they don't necessarily have to go to a church to maintain a relationship with God or with Jesus. They will lose many things when they come out, and God is not one of them.
I like that. Yeah, and then even the recognition, like one thing, like most of the people who have been close to it all have been fairly supportive. But one of the things I've heard a lot of is that even with that, there's this big need to find queer community. And I think about that in the context of church, like how it's weird how I don't feel like there's a weird way in which I feel like I have more of a sense of accountability, in the best sense of the word, to my queer community than I ever felt in church, but it's an entirely different kind of accountability. Like, what is being looked for is not conformity, but like, are you taking care of yourself? Are you healthy? How are you relating to us? Is there mutuality going on here? All the things that should be what accountability means in church, but what accountability means in church is, are you subordinating yourself to proper authority? And are you following the script of like what is righteous, and is usually bound up in authoritarian purity culture stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to think about, like, even this idea of, for a lot of people, them leaving the church ends up driving them to kind of healthy community that actually, in my mind, theologically is more of a church. And that a lot of people miss out on if they didn't actually walk out the door and not turn back.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of just underscoring this idea, like, God's not, you don't have to give up God. God's not give up on you. You can find God in other places.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. One last question. Who's your, and I've been just trying to think of like a light moment, because this hasn't been a grim conversation, but this is pretty heavy stuff. Who are your queeros, like your queer heroes?
My queeros. God, there are so many cool queer people.
I mean,
like,
and you don't have to mention me, because I just assume I'm not.
Well, duh.
You don't have to bother with that.
Oh, my queeros. There are so many. Actually, one of mine is my own pastor, the Reverend Scott Richards. He pastors a little 2-point parish in like South Central Minnesota. He was one of the first openly queer people to be ordained in the Southwestern Minnesota Synod. Mm-hmm. And I just I admire the shit out of that dude. He's been an incredible faith mentor. Mm. Another one of my queeros would definitely have to be the Reverend Polly Murray, who was one of, if not the first, ordained transgender queer folks. God, there's so many out there.
Is that ELCA?
They, I believe, were Episcopal.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This the whole other thing of like, I mean, it's interesting just to go right to the headlines of today's newspaper, the whole Dave Chappelle stuff, and how people just in progressive centers tend to think that it's almost trendy I've heard this
Yeah.
a number of times, to be trans, as though it's ridiculously being openly trans is pretty rare.
Yeah.
And that you don't really, it's not like you're more likely to get some kind of sweet gig or job. Like there's no real social power that comes along with being genderqueer.
It's like, yeah. I now walk around with the target on my back. Trendy, right? Cool. Yeah.
And I always have to wonder if the person who I haven't heard from a while just decided that I'm not in their life anymore. Like all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing about those queeros of yours. And I don't know who either of them are, so that's great to know. I'm a baby queer, so I'm just still learning some of this stuff.
It's all good. We all start somewhere.
Yeah. And thank you for answering my questions and being part of this project.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. And it's good to see your face again.
Yeah, good to see you too. Peace.
Peace.